This week on the Pro Wrestling Podcast, Ember Moon speaks out on her release from the WWE, and she doesn't bite her tongue. Cody Rhodes bringing back the Winged Eagle, fingers crossed. Matt Hardy shoots on the tribalism in professional wrestling. And the native beast, Nyla Rose, talks about the backstage creative process in AEW. I'm your host, Seth Grimes, and this is the Pro Wrestling Podcast. What up, y'all? Welcome to the show. Come on in, sit down, kick your feet up, relax. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna be a little bit short this week. Gonna be a little bit more curt than usual. I'm recovering from a sinus infection. I'm fine. Not here to bitch and complain or get any sympathy. Just saying that I don't have all of my oomph that I normally would. So just bear with me as we get through this show here. And also, just quite frankly, it's a slow news week. Not a lot to talk about. Not a lot of huge news out there in the world of professional wrestling. Obviously, there's the news dropping of the NXT cuts, but a lot of those were still developmental. And, we don't really cover the in-ring stuff as much here. But as far as like podcast news and stuff, kind of a slow week, to be honest with you. But I do think that I've found some gems scouring the internet, YouTube, podcast feeds, all of that, trying to find you great kernels of professional wrestling knowledge and information and just a little bit of fun. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into our first topic here today. The former Ember Moon, now Athena on the indie scene, has been making the podcast rounds, first on the Insight podcast with Chris Van Vliet, as well as doing an interview with Sean Ross Sapp for Fightful. And she did not bite her tongue. She had a lot to say about leaving the WWE and how her run within the WWE and NXT came to an end. Check out this clip from the Chris Van Vliet podcast to hear just exactly how it all came about.
I started seeing this downslope as soon as Hunter was gone. And like for the first little bit, we didn't know why he was gone. We just knew he wasn't there, Yeah. When I've done nothing wrong, when I've given you my entire right side of my body between my elbow surgery and my Achilles surgery, I've given you this entire side for no reward, not even a thank you. And like, you want me to coach, you want to take me on TV to come coach. And I remember just like sitting there a moment and I got teary-eyed just like that. And he's like, "Are you okay?" I go, "No, I'm not okay." I said, "This is what you can do." I said, "I'm not coming up here to coach." I said, "I'm not coming up here to do your PC shows." I said, "I was supposed to come to NXT to repackage and then go back up to main roster. That was supposed to be within the year, but yet I'm still here. You took Shotzi away from me." I said, "I have nothing to go off of." I said, "So I'm going home." And I said, "You leave me there till you have something for me." And I said, and even then, I said, "I need to approve the creative before I hop on the flight." And it's the first time I've ever pulled this card. And I remember thinking, I think I just quit.
WWE dropped the ball with Ember Moon. She's a fucking fantastic talent. She had a great, unique look that a lot of the female wrestlers didn't have in the WWE. She had a good in-ring style. She's very physical. She wasn't the best wrestler on the roster, but she certainly wasn't the worst. You know, when you have a talent the level of an Ember Moon on a talent roster that's kind of thin like that, you should keep that kind of talent around. But hey, it's WWE's loss and anybody else's to gain. She didn't make any bones about it. It sounds like she wants to go to AEW. She had talked about how she was kind of jealous watching AEW, and then people would contact her and tell her how much fun they're having over in AEW. I think she said Dustin was one of them, Dustin Rhodes, who just kind of like hint like, hey, you'd have a whole lot of fun if you came on over this way. Tony has not signed her yet. I don't know why. I would definitely have Athena on my roster. I think she's a fucking wonderful talent. She had my eye from the second that I saw her, and I was a fan instantly. Like I said, you know, she's not the best wrestler on the roster, but certainly you could do a lot worse as well. And she's got the charisma. She's got a fan base. She's got a great following. She's doing the Twitch gimmick now as another form of income for her. So she's going to be just fine. It just doesn't sound like the WWE is that good of a fit for her. And why were they trying to make everybody sexy again? I thought we were past that. I thought that was a thing that we're not doing anymore in wrestling. Look, an attractive woman is a draw, right? If she looks good, that's good for TV. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to tell my people to go walk around in the grocery store looking sexier out in public. It's shameful that they even have to have that conversation. I think if there's women on the roster who want to, because there are plenty, just like dudes, you know, there's guys that like to look good and like to flaunt it, and there's guys that could give a fuck less and walk around in sweatpants, and chicks are the same way. So let the girls do their thing. Let's quit trying to tell women that they need to look sexier, especially out in public on their own time. That's damn near creepy to ask something like that, but in any event, I highly recommend going to listen to this full interview. This clip is not enough to do it justice, and certainly nothing I can say can really explain as good as Ember could in that interview, but she's passionate. She cares a lot, and sounds like she was really very hurt by the release, and it sounds like it was time for her to go. She was getting to the point where she wasn't happy there anymore, and I want to see her land on her feet. Hopefully she does. Hopefully it's in AEW, and you know, so it's on a high level for her, and we shall see. Cody Rhodes continues to make his media rounds since his epic return to the WWE at WrestleMania. This week on the After the Bell podcast, talking with Corey Graves and Vic Joseph, all about his WWE return, a little bit of AEW sprinkled in, some Dusty Rhodes conversation. And by the way, just talking AEW on the After the Bell podcast by name, mentioning the Young Bucks by name. That's kind of fourth wall breaking, opening the forbidden door to a certain extent just right there, because you don't normally hear that on WWE content. But Cody's been very outspoken about it. He doesn't bite his tongue or tiptoe around things. He just kind of says it like it is. But the thing that really caught my attention in this particular interview was when they were talking about how Cody Rhodes, in his last run when he won the Intercontinental title, retired that old, ugly piece of shit oval fucking thing that they had from the Attitude Era. I'm sorry if you like that belt, but it's hot garbage, and everybody knows it. And he brought back the classic Reggie Parks Intercontinental title, the one from the 80s and the early 90s, the one I think Randy Savage debuted initially. And he was able to bring that back, and it had a significant run. It wasn't just there for Cody. It was there well after Cody lost the title. You know, they just recently switched it out for that new abomination that they had. So naturally the conversation led from that to, well, if your goal now is to become the WWE champion, could we possibly see Cody bring back another classic Reggie Parks championship belt from the past? Check out this clip.
About if this was to happen, if the ultimate dream was to be achieved. I did do that once with the Intercontinental title, and it took a lot of work, but it was the right call once we got there. I think there's a particular design of the WWE championship that people are very fond of. You know, I don't even want to say it. It's two words. I think you guys know what. Do you know what I'm referring to?
I know exactly what you're referring to. It's one of the more redundant named aspects of our industry.
Very redundant name.
I have never seen a flying bird without that aspect of their anatomy.
I'd say hypothetically, Vic, it would be something. It really would be something to do that, achieve the ultimate industry dream, being the best of the best ever in terms of that moment in time, and then to perhaps give it a fresh coat of paint with the Winged Eagle, the redundantly named title we are discussing. That would just be something.
Fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed. You know, I was team Cody Rhodes to begin with. I want to see him win the WWE title. I want to see him complete that journey. But now I really want to see him win the WWE title because I don't think he's ruled out bringing back the Winged Eagle title, which, in my opinion, is the best wrestling championship ever created. This is super subjective, right? Everybody's got their favorites. Another one of mine is Big Gold, another one of the most beautiful titles, right? Big, gaudy, fucking just solid gold, heavy piece of machinery. I actually like the belts that they got now, to be honest with you. I don't mind the big blinged out W. It's not as classic as the old Winged Eagle belt. It doesn't have that charm that the Winged Eagle had, but it's still a beautiful belt. So if they never go back to it, I mean, I'm not going to be heartbroken, but I think if Cody has the opportunity and he can win the big one, that if he came out on Monday Night Raw the next night and unveiled the Winged fucking Eagle championship belt, my fucking heart would melt. My heart would melt. It's one of the most popular belts for a reason. It's talked about to this day for a reason. How many championships really get talked about over the history of championships? You know, I'm a huge belt mark. I got a replica of the Winged Eagle here in my home. You know, like I said, I liked Big Gold a lot. I know a lot of people like the Domed Globe, the NWA title. There's people out there that like the Undisputed title. I don't know why. I think after the Winged Eagle, I think everything just kind of went downhill from there. I'm not even that big of a fan of changing the title. I think it adds to the prestige of winning the title when you can say you're holding the same belt that Hulk Hogan held, that Macho Man held, that the Ultimate Warrior held, that Stone Cold Steve Austin held in his hand, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. You know, Stone Cold retired the Winged Eagle, and then he brought out the Big Eagle, which was also a beautiful belt, but not quite the same as the Winged Eagle. And then they went to that abomination of the Undisputed title, which I know a lot of you like, but I just don't get it. It's compared to the Winged Eagle, it's atrocious. Then they went to the even worse, to the spinner gimmicks with John Cena. You know, it's been a rocky road with the history of the championships, but there's something about those old classic Reggie Parks belts, even the tag team titles. You know, the Intercontinental, and I think he did some for WCW too, didn't he? Didn't he do the, I think he did the Vader WCW heavyweight title too. After Rick took Big Gold up to the WWE, they had the WCW title, and I think that was a Reggie Parks belt as well. Another one of my favorites. So just something about those old era belts, and if Cody Rhodes can bring that back, man, how fucking dope would that be? I'm not going to hold my breath, though. I don't think that's going to happen. But hey, I can cross my fingers and we can fucking hope, can't we? Oh, yeah! The Extreme Life of Matt Hardy this week took a look back at the Apocalyptico tag team match and featured Danhausen on to watch the match along with Matt. But before they got into the match, they did talk a little bit of wrestling. And in this particular clip here, Matt Hardy talks about the tribalism in professional wrestling. The, my brand's better than your brand. Meh. Check out this clip.
I just think that negativity is so unnecessary. the tribalism between WWE and AEW fans. Like, you don't have to do this. I mean, I don't know if you enjoy it. The people that do it online on social media, it just creates such a toxic environment in the big scheme of things. Like, if you love WWE, go hard for WWE and support WWE. I love WWE. And, I've said that since day one. I'm never going to say anything differently. Obviously, when I work somewhere else, I'm going to go hard for AEW because they're the people that are paying my bills at the end of the day. So it just like a pro wrestling match, you take shots at your opponent. You talk shit about them, and that's what AEW is going to do to WWE. That's what WWE, in theory, is going to do to AEW, although they don't really mention AEW, in the big scheme of things, but they may take shots in other ways behind the scenes. They may release information about AEW that might make them not sound as good as possible. But, I mean, that's like part of the game. That's part of the business. So don't take that too serious. And if you have a guy in WWE taking shots at an AEW guy, don't sweat it. If you have an AEW guy taking shots at a WWE guy, don't sweat it. It's all part of the game, baby. I mean, it's all part of the whole promotion and the whole fun of pro wrestling,
AEW better than WWE. Meh. WWE better than AEW. Meh. It's sad, but it's the way of the world in general right now. It's not even just professional wrestling. The whole world right now seems so divided. You turn on any news station and all you're going to see is somebody bashing somebody else or talking down about this or that, or everything's so negative, And it doesn't have to be that way with wrestling fans. We're a small community as it is. And I know it's not everybody. I know that a lot of you are able to watch both shows and enjoy both shows for what they are. But as well as I do, just by spending time on the internet, that there's a huge portion of our fandom that hates the other side of our fandom and vice versa. Mainly between AEW and WWE, though you could also say it's indie wrestling versus the mainstream. Look at the reaction that Matt Cardona gets by the GCW fans because they hate sports entertainers. It's the same reason that Chris Jericho is doing the sports entertainer gimmick right now on AEW, because the AEW fans also don't like sports entertainment. And then there's the WWE fans who think that WWE, because they are the top dog, that they're the only game in town and everything else is subpar or inferior or wannabe. And you just see online these people just fighting and arguing over this constantly. AEW never get over 1 million followers. Everything they're doing is just catering to their own audience. Blah, blah, blah. WWE, they never have any good finishes. Their creative sucks. They're run by a crazy old man. Out of touch. Blah, 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 blah. You hear it. You see it back and forth. Look, guys, it's fun to debate. And I'll sit on here and as a podcaster, I'll have a debate with anybody, anytime, about the merits of what makes one brand better than another brand or vice versa. But to sit and just outright have like a nastiness towards another company because you're a fan of one, like, wrestling's such a small community and such a niche thing already that you're gonna niche down and you're gonna further hate. Like, I'm a AEW fan, so fuck WWE. Like, what's the point? At the end of the day, wrestling is wrestling. It comes in different flavors, right? Not just per brand, but even on the same show. You'll get a Danhausen stomping on a bag of chips, and then you'll get a bloody-ass world title match at the same time. So you get that mixed bag, but that's what wrestling is. And there's something in it for you, and there's something for you, and there's something for you. There's people that want their sports-like presentation. They want it to be real still. They want to believe that a pro wrestling match is similar to a UFC match. Then there's the people who love the clown show aspect of professional wrestling. They love the goofy ridiculousness of, fucking Orange Cassidy laying on a ladder under a ring and throwing shin kicks with all of his might. Not. So, Guys, at the end of the day, we're all wrestling fans. It's all professional wrestling, whether you call it sports entertainment, whether it's under a black and gold brand or it's under a red and a blue brand. It doesn't matter, okay? Let's try to take it a little bit easier on everybody. We can debate, we can have fun, we can have our arguments and discussions, but let's leave the vitriol out of it, the hate, the anger. Let's leave all that shit out of professional wrestling, and let's get back to just loving being fans. One of the things I love about this job is when I come across one of those crossover media podcast interviews and worlds collide for me, and I always find that really fun. And when I'm out there, I'm scouring the internet for wrestling interviews, and I come across the Dead Meat podcast, which is something that I listen to because I'm a horror fan, and I watch the Kill Count on YouTube with James A. Janice. And so imagine my surprise when I'm scrolling through YouTube and I come across my man with Dead Meat, James A. Janice, interviewing Nyla Rose, the native beast. And she's wearing a Freddy Krueger shirt, and they're talking horror movies. Just great shit. But in this particular clip, Nyla talks about what it's like backstage and the whole creative process in AEW for her when she's filming vignettes or whatever they're doing. Check out this clip.
So do you ever think of like horror villains and bad guys and like draw inspiration or like put yourself in that mindset?
100%. Especially if I'm in the position where I get to direct vignette or you know, something that's for lack of a better phrase, without breaking kayfabe, a prepackaged deal. You know, if we're putting something in the can, if I get the opportunity to kind of like lend my artistic eye, if you will, I'm like, what if we shoot it like this? And you know, we kind of creep around this tree or have the figure already there, but then they move. It's like little notes like that I picked up from horror movies, every kind of horror movie throughout the ages. Love bringing that kind of stuff to the screen.
I love hearing that you're able to have that kind of creative say in the things that you do. I honestly didn't expect the performers to have that, be able to put their input in as much as that.
It's not always the case. You know, it's not always the case, and definitely not in every company, but creativity is cherished and encouraged at AEW, definitely welcomed. And I probably get on everyone's nerves with like how much hey, can we try this? Can we try this? Let's try one more this way. You know, like what if we like Nyla, we've got other stuff to film. Like, so I'm like, okay, I'll save it for another day. But I'm always thinking about wild ideas.
I like that James was surprised that they have the creative freedom in AEW to do what they want like that. And that's one of the things that I like about AEW. And I know there's a lot of people that will think the opposite, right? That they need somebody in charge of the creative direction altogether that just kind of hands these guys a script and says, go do this. But to me, I think that's one of the big things that separates them from the WWE. You could argue that being at that level, you're a show. You're a high value, high production show. So you need to have a script and everybody's got to be kind of tightly overseen. But I'm of the impression that I like the variety. I like that you can have that if you want that in the WWE, or you can have the super indie promotion that AEW is. And it really is. And that's where a lot of negative feedback comes for AEW. A lot of the haters about AEW will cite that. That's a big Jim Cornette thing, is that they're just it's the inmates are running the asylum and it's poorly managed and blah 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 blah. I don't think it is. I think it's really just, hey man, here's my idea for you. Now you guys go ahead and put the story together. You know, you guys go figure out how you want to tell this story. I'll go over it with you. We'll give you feedback. We'll give you my input. We'll craft it into something that makes sense for the show. But ultimately, you're the professional wrestler. You're the artist. You go out and create the content, right? Like if this is a sketch show, like a Saturday Night Live, are we handing comedians a script? Go do this from the writers? Or are the comedians getting together with the writers, with the producers, to come up with their own ideas for these sketches? That's all AEW is doing. And Nyla Rose having that input when she's cutting her promos or doing her backstage vignettes or skits or segments and the stuff that they do on the vlogs and that kind of thing. It's great that they have that creative freedom. It's great that there's that alternative that exists in professional wrestling at a high level, because WWE has no creative freedom. You know, when you go to WWE, you're basically selling out your ability to be an artist, to just be a cog in the wheel. You know, certainly I'm sure you have some creative input at some level, especially if you're a bigger star. Like, you know, I'm sure a Roman Reigns has plenty of creative input, and a Brock and a Becky Lynch and Kevin Owens, and a lot of these top stars have that to a certain extent, I would imagine, but not to the level of what they're doing in AEW. And it's, you know, whatever one you prefer, I guess, you know, and everybody's going to have their opinions on how a wrestling company should be ran. But I think it's cool that AEW has that. And I think it was cool that Nyla got to kind of get that word out a little bit, because I think a lot of people are under the impression that WWE is so tightly scripted that that's how wrestling is in general. And I think she kind of blew James's mind a little bit there. And then also I just want to shout out the fact that, hey, my man James A. Janice and Dead Meat Podcast gets a cameo here on the Pro Wrestling Podcast, because they were talking a little bit of wrestling with some wrestlers. He's a wrestling fan, James A. Janice is. So if you are a horror fan and a wrestling fan, and you are not familiar with the Dead Meat Podcast, or you're not familiar with the Kill Count on YouTube, the Dead Meat channel on YouTube, go check it out. Check out the horror content and support James A. Janice, because he's a wrestling fan, and clearly he's supporting wrestlers, giving them a stage, giving them a pedestal, giving them a microphone, giving them a voice to talk to people that they don't normally talk to. You know, when wrestlers go on like a Chris Van Vliet always talks to wrestlers. James A. Janice does not. So his YouTube channel is brand new exposure for wrestlers. So awesome shit, good synergy, and just fun to listen to. Worlds collide, baby. So in my travels across the internet this week, I came across another podcast I never knew existed, but I'm thankful that I found it, because it is a treasure, let me tell you. It is called the Toxic Masculinity Podcast. Dan and Don's Toxic Masculinity. And by Dan and Don, I'm talking about Dan the B7 and Don Fry the Predator. Two UFC legends, two UFC Hall of Famers, and of course, both tied to professional wrestling as well. I had no idea they had a podcast, but I think it's a good idea. They're two just big, burly, old, mustachioed men sitting around smoking cigars, talking tough guy stuff, you know. And they had Mick Foley on the podcast this week. And Foley was talking about all kinds of different things, the Hell in a Cell, that sort of stuff. I had no idea, by the way, that Dan Severn was so talkative. I had kind of always thought him to be more of a quiet guy. I think maybe that's just because he never really did promos or anything. But he's got quite the personality on him, and that was something that I really enjoyed checking out this podcast. But in this particular clip that I'll play for you here, Mick Foley was talking with the mustachioed men about the origins of the sock puppet on his fucking hand, Mr. Socko. Check out this clip.
Having a finishing move that incorporated flying off the ring apron onto the concrete was becoming clearly a worse and worse idea each time we went around. And besides, it wasn't a move I could do regularly at the non-televised shows. So a finishing move should be something you could do to anybody, anywhere, at any time. Jim Cornette had brought up to me the Mandible Claw, and it had a great real-life history in that Dr. Sam Shepard, who was the guy that the fugitive, right? Whether he could not or simply would not go back to medicine, I don't know. And he came up with the Mandible Claw, which is a nerve hold under the tongue with the two fingers, and then you push up on the nerve right underneath the point of the chin with your thumb. So it was never an idea of he's sticking that sock down his throat. But now I had 2 years with fans seeing this move work by the time I invented Mr. Socko, which was just a way to cheer up Vince McMahon in the hospital. And when the sock started getting over bigger than I was, I thought, why not just take the mandible claw that's already a force to be reckoned with and put a sweat sock on it.
A sock. The dude got over a sock. This is what is beautiful about professional wrestling, by the way. There's no other sport, there's no other TV show, there's no other entity in the world where somebody can pull a dirty, stinky sweat sock out of their fucking sweatpants, out of the crotch of their sweatpants, and draw their face on it with a Sharpie marker and shove it down people's throats, and it becomes the hottest thing in professional wrestling. It's unbelievable. You can get the dumbest shit over. Remember Moppy? Moppy was over. Inanimate objects do really good in professional wrestling. There was Mitch the potted plant, if you remember that. But a sock, a fucking sock, a dirty sock. Mick goes on to tell a story about selling socks at a merch table. And people not understanding, if they were not familiar with the sock gimmick, they would wonder why you're selling just one sock for $20 instead of a pair. And just never mind. It's wrestling. Don't worry about it. Isn't it amazing too that all the years that Mick spent flying off the top of a cage and falling on the thumbtacks and blowing up in Japan and barbed wire and bang bang on the floor, baby, and all that stuff. And it's a sock that gets him over. And thank God that it did, because it gave Mick a whole new life. Because after that Hell in the Cell match, I would venture to say that Mick Foley's in-ring, best days were behind him. He was pretty well past his prime physically at that point and was not going to be able to have the same kind of matches that he's had in the past. He had a really good run as Cactus Jack. I loved his run that he had in WCW with Sting. It was just great shit. And then when he came to the WWE as Mankind and he worked with The Undertaker, that whole Boiler Room Brawl run, and then the match with Shawn Michaels, Foley had a good run. But by the time he had Mr. Socko, his in-ring work had really slowed down. His body was starting to catch up with him. And it was just perfect timing for that kind of gimmick, something where Mick didn't have to work as hard. And that's the beauty of professional wrestling, is you can find that thing that you can cling on to that's going to get you over, that can save you on your bump card. You don't have to do that shit anymore. It's professional wrestling, and the job is to get over with the fans. It's not necessarily to go out there and kill yourself and abuse your body. That's part of it. And I think ultimately you have to have that in your body of work to be considered a legend, to be considered an all-time great. But to just make a nice fat paycheck, even for a little while, man, if you can get something over like a fucking mop or something like that, you can really do well for a mannequin's head. Just pick any object. You just go find one and get it over. But I recommend going to seek this out, especially if you just like to hear a bunch of manly men sitting around, twirling their mustaches, shooting the shit. It's a good little find, and so I thought I'd bring it to you. Ric Flair is back behind his podcast microphone, this time with the podfather himself, good old son-in-law Conrad Thompson. And this just a couple weeks after a very public breakup and falling out between Ric Flair and his former podcast host, Mark Madden. The show has also been rebranded. It is no longer Ric Flair's Woo Nation Uncensored. The show is now called To Be the Man. And it sounds like they're going to be going with switching up the format between interviews, watch-alongs, and just like ask Natchez and that kind of thing. So sounds like it's going to be a mixed bag, probably just to keep Rick engaged, because let's face it, he's a man who seems determined to have a podcast that doesn't really seem all that entertained doing a podcast. He's bored with it, right? He can't be bothered. But Conrad, if anybody can pull a show out of Rick, it's going to be Conrad. And they did drop their first episode this week. And of course, Ric Flair wasted no time talking shit about his fellow professional wrestling cohorts. This time, the Ultimate Warrior. Check out this clip.
It's been fun for me to think about if you could fantasy book. What if things turned out differently and somehow Jim Hellwig wound up with Jim Crockett Promotions and Steve Borden wound up with the World Wrestling Federation? I think Sting could have somehow been an even bigger star with that WWF merchandising.
Absolutely, and Jim Hellwig would have been on the first match.
Isn't that crazy to think about?
If he got booked, period. Sorry to say that, but you hate to say anything about someone that's not here, but there's no comparison in their ability in the ring.
How many matches did you have with Warrior over the years? Just a handful, right?
Just two in my life.
What was that like?
They were horrible. The first one, I came out of the ring in Winnipeg, Canada, and Pat Patterson was standing there and said, "That's the worst World Championship match I've ever seen in my life." And I said, "Pat, you don't have to tell me. I was in it." The second time with Charles Barkley in the front row in Phoenix, he dropped me on my head, and that's when I got the inner ear problem.
I think we could have did without the throwing Ultimate Warrior under the bus just randomly out of the blue like that. Though he's not wrong. It is, and it's fun to think about. It is. I love these maybes or what ifs in professional wrestling. Wondering what if Sting went to the WWE and if the Ultimate Warrior was in Jim Crockett Promotions. I don't think Rick's too far off. I think all of us could pretty well guess, unless Sting fell victim to locker room politics. And, Flair mentioned that that's a possibility because there was a lot of it in WWE, as always. But, Sting was also a very well-liked guy. Crockett had its share of politics too, whether Rick will say they did or not, and probably not as much as the WWE. But Sting was a well-liked guy. Nobody has anything bad to say about Sting, so I don't think anybody would have tried to set out to ruin Sting. I think had he gone to WWE, he very well could have been an Ultimate Warrior spot. He very well could have been main eventing WrestleMania 6 against the Hulkster. And on the other hand, the Ultimate Warrior and Jim Crockett, I don't know that I buy that he wouldn't be booked. Certainly a guy like that, he had a very unique look for the time. The face paint, there were a few guys doing it, but Warrior, he also had that body that chiseled out of granite. And there were a lot of big guys back then, but Warrior had a very unique build for that era, where a lot of those guys were big and they were burly and they had the barrel chests and all that, and even a six-pack. But very few guys had a bodybuilder shape. Like, they were all like men that smoke cigars and drink mugs of beer at the pub, right? And then get in fights in the back alley. That's what pro wrestlers were. But Warrior was a bodybuilder. So he had that unique look that not a lot of Sting had it too. There were guys, but not a lot. So I think he would have got a chance in Jim Crockett. But Jim Crockett certainly was more of the work rate promotion. It was less showmanship. So Warrior was a much better fit up in the WWE because they didn't need him to be able to work all that great, and they could work around it and hide those flaws. Whereas in Jim Crockett, most likely if you can't work, you're going to get pushed down the card. I think he would have got a chance. He probably would have got buried, though, and I think he probably would have been a flop, and he would not have been the star that he ended up being. But who knows? We can sit here and we can play the guessing game all we like, but it didn't play out that way. I would argue that the guys ended up where they needed to, where fate had to have them land for them to be successful, and they were. And it was a great run for both of them. No regrets on either side. But always fun to think about. And not a bad first episode for Ric Flair's podcast. I'll poke in here and there. But Rick, there still at times seems to have a little bit of trouble staying engaged, having interest, or just, he's given very short answers and that kind of thing. But we'll see how it goes. He's with Conrad, so we'll see where the road takes us, and I will continue to cover it for you. That's it, folks. That's all we got this week. I appreciate you hanging around to the end. I love my end of the show, folks. Like I said, a little bit quicker. I kind of busted through them a little bit quicker than usual. Just a little under the weather, just recovering. My face hurts a little bit. The shit went away by like Thursday. I was feeling good. Had, the infection earlier in the week. And then all of a sudden, just Friday, it just hit me and started kicking my ass again. So I didn't even know it could do that. But hey, anyway, you're not here to hear about that. I do got a few plugs before I let you go. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, at Seth Grimes Media. Check out the videos on YouTube. We have the full podcast up as well as clips from the show. So if you just want to hear certain segments, it's a good way to go and check out back catalog stuff without having to listen to a full podcast episode and dig around. So go check that out on Rumble and YouTube. Just search for Seth Grimes Media or the Pro Wrestling Podcast. I'll be right there. Pop right up, poke you in the eye. How do you like that, fucker? You can also check out my pro wrestling inspired NFTs. That's at cryptomanianft.com or on OpenSea. Just search for Cryptomania NFT and you will see the collection there. I do have some news coming in the very near future. A new project dropping, pro wrestling inspired still. You can also check out my book. I got a book out. It's called The Gathering, A Bold Journey into the Belly of the Juggalo Underworld. About a dude that goes to a music festival. It's a great book. You can find it on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. I recommend the Audible version. It's a lot more fun. That's it. That's all I got. Appreciate you listening to the plugs. Appreciate you listening to the cast. I'm outie. I'm out of here. I got shit to do. Fuck off already. Thank you, though. Truly, thank you for sticking around. I'm your host, Seth Grimes, and I want to thank you for checking out another episode of the Pro Wrestling Podcast.